A leap tears through the mist. A set of fangs awaits beneath the thick grass. Here, a centimeter's error means death. Predator and prey, the line between them is as fragile as a breath. Strength, speed, or precision, what will help you survive until sunset? The harsh Africa, a deadly confrontation between a wild cat and a giant snake. Under the dense, tall grass, the sharp eyes lose their advantage as vision is obscured by thousands of dry blades of grass. The Serval leopard is forced to scan the space with its enormous ears, picking up every tiny vibration to convert into precise coordinates in its killer brain. Every scurrying mouse hooves or rustling blade of grass is meticulously analyzed, transforming the hunter into a perfectly functioning navigational machine operating in the darkness of the grassland. Serval compresses its body and then explodes, launching itself nearly 3 meters into the air like an arrow tearing through the morning mist. It calculates its trajectory with an error of less than a few centimeters, shifting its entire body weight onto its front paws to pin its target to the hard ground. This is not simply a jump, but a physics problem of survival, where speed and force converge to finish off prey in an instant. But the prairie always hides deadly traps at the hunter's landing point, when the prey turns out to be a venomous cobra. Just a small error, and the snake's fangs will pierce the skin, injecting venom into the bloodstream and causing the leopard's heart to stop beating immediately. The Serval leopard twisted its body, delivering a powerful claw strike to knock the snake's head away, escaping the clutches of death as the venom was just inches from it. Under the thick grass that obscured its vision, the strongest predator doesn't necessarily possess a resounding roar or brute strength. The Serval leopard's survival depended entirely on precision. A single centimeter off course upon landing would send the hunter straight into the fangs of its enemy. It survived by transforming precision into its ultimate weapon, proving that, in nature, finesse is sometimes the only line between life and death. But when the grass was no longer tall enough to conceal its movements, when the open space exposed every trace under the scorching sun, precision alone was insufficient for survival. Instinct had to evolve to adapt to a new battlefield, where enemies could see each other from afar and everything was decided in a single moment. When the tall grass is no longer thick enough to conceal its calculated leaps, the hunter is forced to venture into the harsh light of the semi-desert landscape. Here, the caracal transforms its sandy-colored plumage into a cloak of invisibility, allowing its massive muscles to completely blend into the dry, rocky ground. It moves silently, its claws hidden deep within its paw pads to avoid making any sound as it approaches its target in a battlefield with no hiding places. A few meters away, a flock of guinea fowl continuously flap their wings and emit alarm calls, ready to escape at the slightest disturbance in the air. The caracal holds its breath, patiently waiting for the moment the wind blows in the opposite direction to erase its body scent and any last stealthy sounds. Its long black ears rotated like radar, tracking the flapping wings of its prey to pinpoint the perfect moment for a decisive burst of power. In this open battlefield, there was no second chance to correct a miscalculation, even a fraction of a second. The caracal unleashed all its energy from its hind legs, soaring into the air and extending its body to lock onto its target with its sharp claws. It pounced directly on the prey's chest with enough force to break wing bones. Turning a flying creature into a meal before the dust even settled. In a world where hesitation was no room, the caracal survived by mastering every fleeting moment of its explosive power. A missed pounce meant the depletion of all its energy reserves and the gnawing hunger under the scorching sun. It didn't need the cover of tall grass to succeed. It only needed a single moment to assert its position as a dominant warrior in the desolate wasteland. But there are predators who don't gamble their lives on lightning-fast leaps or instantaneous reflexes. They choose to vanish into the shadows of the riverside trees, waiting for hours to execute a more cold-blooded strategy. That's when brute strength gives way to the superior calculation of the giant predator. When the explosive leaps of the Caracal end under the scorching sun, a different hunting order begins in the shade of the riverside forests, where speed is no longer the deciding factor. Here, survival is weighed on the scales of intelligence and patience, where the predator chooses to vanish to await a flawless finishing blow. The leopard enters the fray by obliterating its own presence in the dense foliage along the riverbank. It doesn't bask in the sun or hunt prey in open fields, but chooses to freeze all movement high up in the trees. Its spotted coat breaks its form in the dappled light, transforming its 60-kilogram mass into an invisible ghost patiently observing everything below. The leopard locks onto its target in the gaps in the baboon troop's defenses, known for their pack instincts and ferocity. It holds its breath, pressing its chest against the rough wood, waiting for its prey to stray from the protective circle of the alpha males with their sharp fangs. Instead of using speed to pursue, it uses silence to suffocate the space, turning waiting time into its ultimate weapon to find the perfect attack scenario. The leopard plunges from the treetops, executing a calculated freefall before landing on soft footpads to silence itself. It sprints a short distance, sinking its curved claws into the prey's flank and sinking its fangs deep into the spinal cord to sever all nerve signals. The hunt ends in absolute silence, with no lengthy chases, only a single fatal bite that ends the prey's life in an instant. The leopard's strategy doesn't stop at killing its prey. It also lies in how it protects its harvest from greedy poachers. It strains its entire shoulder and front leg muscles to drag the heavy carcass up the high branches of the acacia trees. Removing the meal from the ground is a crucial survival decision. helping it avoid the jaws of hyenas and ensuring a valuable calorie supply for the following days. The leopard devoured the first piece of meat quickly, but it wasn't eating to satisfy its own hunger. Behind the decisive bites and hours of stalking, a more arduous task awaited it in the dark cave. It strained to drag the carcass upwards, not to show off its strength, but to preserve the last vestiges of life for the tiny creatures trembling with hunger. The cold-blooded killer now had to shed its solitary nature to face the greatest burden of its life, feeding the next generation. Leaving the carcass high above, the mother leopard weaves through the sharp thorns to return to her den. Two tiny cubs with soft fur immediately nestle against their mother's belly, seeking warmth and precious milk. Here, the predator that just killed the baboon is forced to retract its 3-centimeter-long claws and lie down on the rough ground to protect the defenseless creatures. The life of a lone mother on the savannah is a never-ending race against lurking ghosts. She is forced to move her cubs constantly, erasing all traces of scent to deceive the keen sense of smell of hyenas and male lions. Every meter of the journey requires the mother leopard to tense every nerve, ready to use her body to shield herself from the bloodthirsty fangs lurking in the shadows. The mother leopard sacrifices most of her calories for milk production, accepting the depletion of her body and the loss of muscle mass. She gnaws at her ravenous hunger to maintain absolute alertness, ensuring that no python or enemy can penetrate her den. In this world, the mistakes of a lone wolf lead to starvation. But the mistakes of a mother will lead to the extinction of an entire lineage. For the leopard, taking down prey is now just the beginning of a far more arduous journey. She no longer hunts to satisfy her killer instincts, but to nourish eyes learning to see the world. Survival is no longer a personal choice. It becomes a commitment written in blood, labor, and silent sacrifice under the Serengeti night sky. The air in the cave suddenly thickens, and the chirping of insects outside falls eerily silent. The mother leopard suddenly raised her head, her ears turning sharply toward the dry leaves, rustling silently under an immense weight. The birds in the acacia trees suddenly flapped their wings and scattered, signaling that death was slowly creeping from the shadows, aiming directly at the cave entrance. Without waiting for danger to reach her cubs, the mother leopard tightened her claws and silently glided out of the shadows to confront the intruder. The mother leopard suddenly froze, every nerve in her face tensing as she caught the sound of dry leaves being crushed under an immense weight. Just a few meters from the cave entrance, a giant rock python was coiling itself through the thorny bushes, sniffing the milk of defenseless creatures. Without waiting for the enemy to reach the cave entrance, the mother leopard squeezed through a crevice in the rocks, proactively entering the life-or-death confrontation to stop death from the very beginning. The mother leopard bristled her fur along her back, transforming her muscular body into a living shield blocking the only entrance to the den. The python coiled its massive body, ready to strike and suffocate any life within its grip. The mother leopard continuously unleashed thunderous blows with her sharp claws, tearing apart the thick scales to force the intruder into a defensive posture. Giving the opponent no chance to tighten its encirclement, the mother leopard seized the moment the python missed its mark after a desperate headbutt. She pounced like a ghost, sinking her fangs into the only weak point on the back of the enemy's neck and using the force of her jaws to crush the python's spinal cord. The battle raged in the dust, where the instinct to protect her offspring transformed an exhausted mother into an invincible warrior. When the python's coils were reduced to mere unconscious contractions, the mother leopard released her prey and stood proudly in the darkness of the savannah. She cared little for the enormous carcass she had just killed, only for her absolute safety inside the cave. This victory brought no calories to her hungry stomach. but it brought life to a new generation of leopards that had just escaped the clutches of death. In the wild, predators are not born perfect. They must undergo a fierce evolutionary journey, learning to survive through different levels of instinct. From the absolute precision of the Serval leopard under the tall grass, to the mastery of the Caracal's explosive moment in the open field, or the strategic patience of the leopard stalking in the riverside foliage. But the pinnacle of that journey lies not in killing skills, but in the transformation into responsibility. The food from a successful hunt only sustains life for a few days, but the protective instinct is what sustains an entire lineage through generations. Because there are times when survival is no longer a personal choice, but an invisible commitment that compels the strong to protect the weak. The journey from a lone killer to a protective mother is the clearest evidence of the miraculous power of nature. If you were impressed by this dramatic survival story, please subscribe and leave your thoughts below. We'll meet again on our next wildlife exploration adventures. Goodbye.
The invisible mouth is gaping in the mud, waiting for the first moment of the dry season. Just one step down the mud edge, the prey has gone straight into the dead zone. Will any creature be able to escape the hidden jaws of the crocodile? The river that swallows its prey. Crocodile ambush. Dawn floods the savanna with a pale ash light, filtering through the dry grasses that are bending because of the heat that has receded since the night before. And in the midst of that quiet atmosphere, the river appears as a dark strip of water, so thin that it seems that just a strong wind can tear it in two. However, whether shrinking or expanding, African rivers are never gentle. They change their nature with the seasons, like giant creatures that shrink when hungry and swell when full of water. In the rainy season, they flow furiously, carrying with them the mud and the soul of the vast land. But when the dry season comes, the water recedes, leaving behind cracked mud and jagged rocks, like ancient teeth rising from the sun. It is during this period of water scarcity that all living things are drawn to the river as if they have no choice but to face hunger and thirst and what awaits beneath the surface. From the distant horizon, yellow dust rises with the migration of antelope, zebra, and buffalo. The heat creates ripples on the ground, pushing the herds toward the places they both need and fear most. Though they know the river gives life, they also know that one wrong step can turn the water into a precipice. The fragile surface of the water reflects the early morning light like a smooth metal plate. But beneath that layer of silence, something waits. Small vibrations, as light as breath, spread and disappear so quickly that only those who live by instinct can recognize their existence. Deep in the mud, where the light faded to black, a huge figure lay pressed against the bottom. Not moving, not making a sound. Only the yellow eyes half open, watching every movement on the bank. The old eyes of one who had lived through enough seasons to know that shallow water was when the river was most dangerous. Raga lay there, his body completely submerged in the mud as if he and the river were one. He knew the caravan was approaching. He knew hunger was beginning to bite at his ribs. And he knew that sooner or later the water would have to open its mouth, as it does in every dry season. On the bank, the early morning breeze began to stir the blades of grass. Down below, Raga's yellow eyes were still open, motionless and patient. Waiting for a footstep to slip into the mud, and the silence of the river would suddenly turn to a swallowing sound. The surface of the water seemed to flatten out as the herd of antelope approached. Small vibrations fell on the mud like rain, transmitted through the soft soil and touched Raga's body. He felt each beat as clear as the sound of a heartbeat right in his ear. No eyes saw him, no breath touched him, only the river, surrounding and swallowing his existence like an extension of his body. A young impala slowed down with thirst. It bowed its head toward the brown water, its feet digging into the liquid mud. It small body trembled slightly from fatigue after many days of travel. Thirst made it lose its guard for just a moment, and in just that moment, the river could change its fate in a beat. Raga compressed all his muscles like a bowstring stretched to the limit. Hunger made his body heat up under the cold mud, making each bundle of muscles tremble slightly, as if urged by the most primitive instinct. The distance narrowed. The savanna above seemed to be silent. The river was silent too. Raga rushed forward. Mud tore up like a column of black smoke. Water sprayed in arcs. Heavy teeth rushed with the inertia of the whole body accumulated over many hours of waiting. The bite was strong enough to break the prey's legs. Mud sprayed like the breath of a river torn apart. His teeth locked tightly on the prey's neck. It was not just victory, but life, a rare reward in the long drought that drained every animal. The antelope thrashed, then gave up. Raga twisted his body, dragging the prize down into the darkness where he believed he alone was in control. Not joy, a concept he had no concept of, but a respite from the hunger that had tormented him for days. But then the water moved, deep, fast, greedy. Long shadows slid in without warning. The large bodies pressed against him, without greeting, without mercy. They did not care that he was the hunter, did not care how the prey had been defeated. The scent of blood in the water was an invitation, and to crocodiles, that invitation is never extended to a single individual. A strong thrust pushed Raga aside. The prey in his jaws was torn off a large chunk of flesh, as if torn by invisible hands. The mud swirled. The large heads opened their jaws and fought in the chaotic vortex without looking at each other. Raga growled in his throat, a muted sound as the water swallowed him. He squeezed back his prize but only kept the smallest part. The rest was torn to pieces by his younger, stronger, more aggressive brethren in the river. There was a flash of bitterness in him, an emotion no one thought crocodiles had, but it existed like a short pain. He had the prey, but he did not get to choose how to keep it. The river decided for him. When the whirlpool faded, Raga drifted back into the deep mud. His belly was still more empty than expected. The old man's pride was torn away by a thin layer that no one saw. But he held it all down and swallowed the last remaining meat. Then the river changed its rhythm. Another vibration came, stronger than the three who had just taken the share. Not in a hurry, not tearing. But carrying the air of someone who wanted to take everything. Raga opened his eyes. The hunger had not yet subsided when a new threat arrived. The vortex of the fight was fading, but the mud at the bottom had not yet settled. Raga lay motionless, the little meat left in his jaws not enough to pull the hunger from his belly. The whole river had just witnessed him win, then lose most of his spoils simply because of the presence of his kind. It was something the crocodile never spoke of, but always felt clearly. The old always lost more than the young. The cold mud pressed against his body, but deep in his chest was a hollow feeling like wind blowing through a cave. Not sadness nor regret. For a species like him, something no bite could defeat. He had held all his prey with strength and surprise alone. But today, the water was no longer on his side. Another crocodile was approaching. Not a disorderly scavenger. This vibration was slow, deliberate, and carried with it the confidence of one who knew he had the right to claim any position in the river. He felt every wave that crashed against him, a declaration that the water no longer belonged to him. The river was leading to a confrontation that Raga knew he could not escape. Raga tensed his muscles slightly, the mud around him moving hesitantly. The discomfort that burned behind his jaw was not anger, but the slight sting of an old instinct being touched. The fear of losing the only thing that held him to his feet, the right to ambush in this water. The river thickened with dark movement as the sun rose. The scent of blood from the antelope Raga had just captured still hung in the water, drawing more crocodiles from all the tributaries. They crept silently in. No roars, no warnings. But their multitudes made the water begin to tremble like a giant, impatient body. Raga felt each long shadow moving around him. None of them came to share the food, even when most of the prey had been taken. They came for the scent of blood. And because the disturbance of the herd always brought on the crocodile's second instinct, to attack anyone who stood nearby. A large individual rushed from the left, no longer aiming at the prey, but straight at Raga. It rammed his flank, the impact enough to tear the mud into a vortex. The attack had no reason, other than to assert its position in a water area that had become too crowded. Raga spun sharply, sweeping his tail into his opponent's belly. The dark water swirled, but as soon as he turned, another crocodile latched onto his hind leg, pulling down with enough force to tip the heavy body over. Not one enemy, not two. It was the chaos of the river when crocodiles swarmed too much, when prey was scarce, when water was low, and when all the species' darkest instincts were awakened. Raga struggled up, escaping the bite by twisting and slamming into the riverbed. Black mud covered everything, but he could still feel every impact, every tear of water from the teeth searching for a weak spot in any individual caught between them. A younger crocodile lunged forward, biting Raga's rough neck. The bite wasn't deep, but it carried the recklessness of youth. Something old ones like Raga knew all too well. Young crocodiles always want to prove something, even when there's no reason other than the size of the herd. Raga fought back, but the river had become a battlefield of his kind. There was no longer a line between friend and foe. There was only the chaos of jaws trying to overwhelm each other for every inch of water, every opportunity, every little piece of flesh that fell into the mud. The water shook more violently, as if the river could not bear the weight of so many predators at once. In the midst of the chaos, Raga understood one thing. When crocodiles gathered in such large groups, the most dangerous ones were not the prey, but the ones swimming beside them. A shove from behind pushed Raga completely out of the water he had occupied for so many years. His breath caught, not from pain, but from the cold feeling that ran down his spine. The feeling of losing his position, losing the right to ambush, losing his way of life. And just as he was trying to turn back into the deep water, the ground shook in a completely different way. Heavy, even, not belonging to the crocodile. They would explode the water. They would destroy all order at the bottom of the river. And the river would choose the strong or drown the weak. The ground began to shake, a deep, steady sound, like the drum of the savannah beating on the riverbed. The mud was lapping at Raga's belly, each grain of earth vibrating with the footsteps approaching from the far bank. The buffalo herd. They came not because the river needed them, but because their bodies needed water. And as the buffalo herd stepped down, the mud was crushed, the water was torn into waves, all the darkness at the bottom rolled into the light. For the crocodiles, this was both a disaster and an opportunity. Chaos meant more bodies falling into deep water. Chaos meant a greater chance of hunting, but also the risk of being trampled by the huge prey. The buffalo herd rushed down the mudflats, each pounding footfall making the water tremble as if it were about to break. The mud was churned up in dark columns, obscuring all vision of the bottom. But in the chaos, Raga sensed what he had been waiting for all morning. A calf slipped from the herd. It tried to find a foothold, but the mud bank collapsed under its weight. In that moment, the line between life and death was as thin as a hair. Raga crawled out of the darkness. No hesitation, no delay. All his remaining strength was put into one final lunge. He bit, teeth locked around the calf's leg. The sound of water bursting like muffled thunder. The herd roared, kicking wildly. A gore grazed Raga's flank, stunning him, but he did not let go. The river swirled around him, pulling the prey deeper. Raga felt the weight of the herd pressing down, but also felt the undeniable truth. Whoever keeps the prey in this chaos keeps the right to exist in the river. And the young buffalo disappeared into the dark waters with Raga. The river closed its mouth. The storm subsided, and as the mud slowly returned to the bottom, only Raga's golden eyes opened from the darkness. Tired but alive, the river had chosen him once more. The surface of the water returned to a calm, as if it had never been chaotic. Only for a small patch of mud to rise and disappear. But the drought was not over, and the river still had many unsatisfied hungers. In the upper reaches of the water, a new shadow had appeared, larger, quieter, and unlike any Raga had ever faced. How many more times will the river open its mouth, and who will be the next to be swallowed? Don't miss the next episode. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the fiercest confrontations in the wild.